Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video, and in this video, I'm back talking about the Assassin's Creed series once again, where, 5 years ago, I did my series ranking on the Assassin's Creed series. However, ever since then, I always intended on redoing that video 5 years after my initial one, and here we are. We're here in 2024, I'll be ranking every main series entry in the Assassin's Creed series. Now, straight up, since then, there's only been 2 entries in the series. Since the last video, Valhalla came out, a year and a half after my initial ranking, and Mirage didn't come out until 3 years after that. So again, there's not many new entries to be ranking here, only 13 in comparison to the 11 from last time. However, I do have a lot of placement changes on this list, and a lot of that comes from the fact that I'm in a very different headspace when it comes to the Assassin's Creed franchise than what I used to be. At the time, I was still cautiously in love with Assassin's Creed. Obviously Odyssey had come out, which my love of Assassin's Creed was starting to fade away, but I think we're at the point now where my hope for a series is just really gone. And despite the fact that we are seeming to get out of the heavy RPG turn that the series had gone through, I just simply don't care anymore about the franchise. And again, I still go back and play the games I really enjoy at points. I'm still doing retrospectives of the earlier games, but just in terms of my overall love of the franchise, it's not really there anymore. However, I do, again, still have a lot of respect for those older games. And through that, again, it kind of makes me recontextualize a lot of this list. There are changes made to this list in the year since that are pretty massive changes. Whether that be big swings up or down. Some games dropping significantly, some games increasing significantly. And even then, some games that, even though their placements didn't change, my overall opinion on those games changed quite a bit. So again, I still feel like there's a decent chunk of stuff to talk about, despite the fact that, again, the number of games here isn't that vastly different from the last time we did it. But either way, we got 13 games to rank here. And let's start off at the bottom. The worst game in the Assassin's Creed series, to me, at 13, is Assassin's Creed Odyssey. And again, this has not changed. Odyssey sucks. Odyssey is the worst Assassin's Creed game by far. Really, it's not even an Assassin's Creed game. It shouldn't be an Assassin's Creed game. It's really just a generic open world RPG taking place in ancient Greece that had the Assassin's Creed label slapped on it. Even at the time of development, developers didn't want to make it a mainline entry into the series, but were forced to by Ubisoft. And again, Odyssey is not really an Assassin's Creed game. It's a game that completely breaks the lore of the franchise through the wonky way the Animus works. You don't even have the Assassin Templar conflict in the game, and what is there are very clear retcons. You also get Cassandra showing up in a suit in the modern day, which is ridiculous. Again, there's that idiocy to the game. But even beyond that, it's just a very shallow RPG. Even if we're taking this purely from a game perspective, it's a soulless game. It's a game where the characters are written terribly, and that's because there's no real character to them. They are just these generic shells for you exposit dialogue through, where you have these dialogue choices, though none of them are consistent with any character that the character would have. Which, straight up, Themistios is the worst protagonist in the Assassin's Creed series by far. Again, there's no character to them. It's insane to me that people talk about Cassandra as one of the best Assassin's Creed protagonists when she has no true character traits. Her character flip-flops on the whim of whatever you decide for her. It can be consistently inconsistent. And just mixing that with the fact that, again, every character just comes off so soulless and cartoony to where it makes most of the narrative just come off as ridiculous. And even beyond that, again, when looking at this from an Assassin's Creed point of view, there's almost nothing making it an Assassin's Creed game. There's no assassins in the game. There's no assassinations. Where, as much as I want to criticize these newer RPG Assassin's Creed games, at least the other ones in the series have assassinations. This game doesn't even have that. You just get this very over-the-top combat system that feels very much inspired by The Witcher 3, with this essentially just being The Witcher 3 in Greece, just with the Assassin's Creed label tacked onto it. Again, there's no parkour. Most of the map is just this empty, with you being able to climb all these mountains with no thought to it. You can even jump down things and not get damaged. It's ridiculous. And really the only thing I can truly think of from this game that I do think is actually kind of good is the Cult of Cosmos system. I think that was at least kind of fun to play around with, but simply just not enough to elevate this game beyond any other entry in the series. I just really feel like there's nothing good, especially from an Assassin's Creed point of view for Odyssey. Again, I personally hate Odyssey. I think it's by far the worst entry in the series. not even close. Now, number 12, and I think this one's a little bit tougher for me, as, again, Odyssey was by far the worst. I think it's on its own separate tier. But now we have a tier of the next 3 games I think are also all 3 pretty bad, all for very different reasons. This game did go down on my ranking here, not by that much. It really just flip-flopped with another entry. But I feel like as time goes on, my respect for this entry goes down even more, and that game is Assassin's Creed Syndicate. And Syndicate's a game that I remember last time I did this list, I had just played Syndicate and it was very fresh in my mind. I feel like maybe that was an aspect of why I put it higher. But even then, I admitted that I feel like it probably was recency bias. And I do think now, looking back on Syndicate, it is pretty bad. I mean, especially from an Assassin's Creed's point of view. Again, it is written like a parody of Assassin's Creed. I mean, a lot of the characters in this game feel like caricatures being written in this very over-the-top way. I feel like only like Evie and Henry Green, I guess, are written in a more grounded way, but even then, they still play off of these more ridiculous characters to where there's still some dumb things going on with them. I still look at Jacob as one of the worst Assassin's Creed protagonists. Evie, to be fair, is not even that much better, especially considering how sidelined she is in the story, where I do kind of like the aspect of 2 protagonists, at least on paper. I do like this aspect of Jacob hunting down his targets, while Evie is obviously hunting for the Shroud of Eden and also fixing the mistakes of Jacob. I kind of like that dynamic, though at the same time, I don't love how much of a focus Jacob takes over Evie, which makes all that a bit underwhelming. You also have the gameplay, which is a more polished version of Assassin's Creed. Unity, though, also has some major drawbacks from Unity. First, you have the combat system, which is pretty bad. This ridiculously fast-paced combat system that feels very cartoony, feels like they're essentially just copying off of Batman Arkham, while parkour-wise, it's also really bad because the overall level design is just not made for parkour. Again, it is a game set in the late 1800s, which just straight up is a setting that is terrible for Assassin's Creed, where really they should have just never went to this time period. And because of that, they have to include the rope launcher, to where that completely nullifies most of the parkour in this game, where you're just zooming around on a rope launcher in an Assassin's Creed game, which is really stupid. And really, just in general, again, I feel like Syndicate, again, also gives me very little of what I want from the Assassin's Creed series. There's no real depth to the story. It's very black and white. The assassins are the good guys. The Templars are these cartoonish villains. The characters are extremely shallow. The gameplay experience is, again, not great. I do like the black box missions. At least there's that. And I think if you're looking at this game from more of a historical tourism lens, then there is stuff to like. But again, that's not what I want from Assassin's Creed. And I feel like as an Assassin's Creed game, this is a bad game, which is unsurprising coming from Ubisoft Quebec. So because of that, for me, again, I have it here, number 12. Now, number 11, we're moving on to also bad Assassin's Creed game for different reasons. This one almost entirely due to writing, and that game is Assassin's Creed Rogue. And Rogue is a game that I just have very conflicted thoughts on. I mean, in my last list, I had it second to last, which obviously it's not in that spot anymore. Though there was also a point where, like, immediately after this came out, where I was extremely high on Rogue. I thought Rogue was one of my favorites in the series. And I think this is a game that I do just have conflicting opinions on it. I do mostly think this game is bad, though. Now, for the most part, obviously, it's just a redo of Black Flag. I don't really take much away from it, as I understand the limitations of the game. I still think the game is fun to play for the most part, though it doesn't really elevate much beyond Black Flag. It's essentially just Black Flag with a couple minor improvements, but also some demerits in the fact that it's taking place in a much worse setting. I mean, the setting of North America is way more boring than that of the Caribbean. The city of New York is still one of the worst Assassin's Creed cities in my mind. But again, those aren't my major complaints. My main complaints of this game come from its writing, its handling of the Assassin-Templar conflict, which is just, again, so shallow. It's done in a way where, again, it's branded on this concept of, oh, you play as a Templar this time. You're going for the Assassins. It shows this different perspective, but it really doesn't. All it does is just completely flip-flop the writing of the two sides, where now the Templars act as if they're assassins and the assassins now act as if they're Templars. And again, still doing it in a very shallow way, where the Templars are looked at as the good guys, while the assassins are looked at as the bad guys. Again, it lacks a lot of depth. Which I should also mention there is ridiculous from the fact that the assassins literally have headquarters in New York that have their flag flying for everyone to see, which is so stupid. The character Shay is one that I've always been conflicted on, as again, I really liked him when I first played the game, but I think now I kind of realize that, oh, he's kind of bad, and he's another character that doesn't really have much development. A lot of his decisions are kind of idiotic. The modern day in Rogue is also just kind of pointless. Obviously, just this redo of Black Flag, so with the characters of Otso Berg and Violet Costa, Saga, which really just ends up being Berg just wanting to be a dick to the assassins and show them footage of Shay killing American assassins, which is just so stupid. Now, I will say, I do find this game kind of memeable. I do think there are many moments in this game that are just kind of funny. I make my own luck, Liam, and you made me slaughter innocents. Those lines in particular, like, stick in my mind for whatever reason. But as a whole, I mean, like, the writing in Rogue is really bad. And when we're adding in the aspect of this being kind of the conclusion to the Kenway Saga, being this, like, middle entry to where we see the fall of the American assassins, it also ends up being underwhelming in that light, where, I mean, all this is just a very blatant retcon. None of this really makes sense in conjunction with AC3 in particular, and even then, the characters here aren't written consistently. I mean, Haytham feels like a very different character from how he acts in AC3. You also have Achilles, same thing. I mean, the characters aren't consistent here, the writing is just all around pretty bad, and the gameplay experience is, again, just kind of a redo of Black Flag, to where I think as a whole, this is still a pretty bad Assassin's Creed game, but I think out of the ones we've talked about so far, it's at least the shortest of the bunch, meaning it's the most palatable to play and replay. It also is the one that at least takes itself the most seriously, and at least it does have Assassin and Templars. I mean, at least that's a thing. So because that for me, again, I have it here, number 11. Number 10, and I think there's the most good in this specific entry of the bad games, but it's also has some of the worst stuff in the entire series as well. And that game is Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and this is a massive drop from what my thoughts were at the time of Valhalla. I even said in my review of Valhalla at the time that this would probably be around number 6 on my ranking. So obviously it's a pretty big drop off. And straight up, Valhalla does some things pretty well. I think in terms of its connection to the previous games in the series, there's a lot to like. I do like the fact that they wrapped up the modern day in a really satisfying way, being able to bring in the Death of Desmond alongside the assumed Subject 16 message from Brotherhood that confirms this theory that I had for years about that in a really cool revelation at the end of the game. I do love that this game actually has assassins in it, which again shouldn't be that hard to do, but really Odyssey and even Origins prove that to us, though. To be fair, even here they're still called the Hidden Ones. We see the fall of the Order of the Ancients and its transition to the Templars. And again, there's some cool lore bits there. Again, nice Easter egg from Bayek. Again, there are good things in this game for sure. The problem is that none of those good things matter. Where outside of the modern day ending, which obviously impacts Layla, I guess, none of these other aspects of the story really have any impact on the overall story of the game. Where despite these things happening around Eivor and Eivor interacting with these things, she really takes none of that in. She really doesn't care about any of that, and it doesn't impact the story, which just makes it all this feel very superfluous. And speaking of which, Eivor is a character that I just never really gelled with. I think she's a boring protagonist. While there is development for her over the course of the story, it was just never a story that I personally cared about. Also, the main thing that I criticize Valhalla for is the overall game design, and it's just dreadful. Like, I genuinely cannot imagine playing Valhalla again. I think it feels like a miserable experience, and that is why Valhalla is this low, is because the gameplay experience is one that I simply just have no interest in ever experiencing again. I feel like Valhalla is a game that just sounds miserable to have to play through all of these individual arcs, most of which not really mattering, having to play a game for like 70 hours just to get to the ending in a game that is even really that good. Again, if this was something to the quality of like Persona 5 or The Witcher 3, then at least there you're getting this like really incredible gameplay experience out of that. Here, you're just not. It's Assassin's Creed Valhalla. I never really gelled with the Viking fantasy of it all. I never really gelled with the Asgard aspects, which are really stupid, even in Assassin's Creed lore. The Vinland Saga is cool, but I was still always like a little bit disappointed they didn't do more with it. I just feel like Valhalla, while it does definitely have higher highs than the next couple entries we'll be talking about, I feel like those high highs don't matter. They don't really add much to the series, while a lot of the stuff outside of the really great stuff is really bad and just stuff I have no interest in ever experiencing ever again. And it's really the really miserable gameplay experience that I remember from Valhalla that makes me put it as low as it is here, number 10. Now, number 9, we're moving on to the middle tier of the list here. All these games that we're about to be talking about are games that I think are fine for the Assassin's Creed series, but obviously not the peak of the series. And we're starting that all off with the most recent entry in the series. That is Assassin's Creed Mirage, which, again, I think it being this high is much higher than I was expecting it to be coming into it. Again, I was pretty low on the prospects of Mirage. I did think it was going to be a very shallow Assassin's Creed experience, and while, again, it kind of is, at least is a passable one. Yeah, I think in comparison to the previous games we talked about, I definitely have less flaws with Mirage. I think my two biggest flaws with Mirage are the fact that, again, I think narratively it's not as interesting as I personally want it to be. I kind of find the character of Basim kind of dull, but I think the other thing is the fact that it's not really the Assassin's Creed 1 style game that it was kind of branded as. I think it's more so in line with the more later entries that still follow the Assassin's Creed formula, like Unity and Syndicate, which again still do take away from the initial concept of Assassin's Creed, but are still fine enough gameplay experiences. And again, I had fun playing Mirage at points. I do think there are aspects of its gameplay that are pretty good. I do think the tool system is pretty solid. I did like playing around with these settings on a lot of them to see what works best. I liked most of the investigation portions of the game. I mean, there were some tedious missions here and there, particularly the tailing missions were pretty bad. Though, to be fair, there's not that many of them. But I do think there's disappointment to be had from the fact that the black box assassination missions are actually mostly linear, to where while you can lure your target out or find its hideout in different ways, the way you actually end the assassination is usually the same for all the targets, and I feel like that is extremely underwhelming. And again, I still think the focus on the story being Basim's acceptance and recognition of the fact that he's a reincarnation of Loki is still really stupid, especially for a presumed return to form for Assassin's Creed, but I still enjoyed the game well enough. I think it is a fine gameplay experience, one that did feel refreshing after the likes of Origins, Odyssey, and Valhalla, though it still does have some lore discrepancies, still has some very janky gameplay systems where, again, the parkour is not as intuitive as I would like it to be. The social stealth is just not utilized in a satisfying way, but I do think as a whole the game is just largely fine, where I just think it's a completely baseline experience for me. I think it's better than all the games that I think are actually bad, but it's not as good as any of the games that I think have more good to it. So again, I don't hate the game, but I can't really elevate it much higher than here than number 9. Now, number 8, moving on to a game that I did debate this one in Mirage. I do think this one does have some bad to it, and I think Mirage is a more polished game than this. However, I have more of a connection to this game slightly, and that game is Assassin's Creed Unity. And Unity, I believe, has dropped on this list. I believe it was higher than the next entry we'll be talking about on my previous list. However, I feel like Unity for me is, again, just kind of more in line with the last entries we've talked about. Again, I think it is very close to Mirage in my mind, of this game that's obviously trying to mirror that of like the original Assassin's Creed, though its gameplay systems are not refined enough to really do so. Again, a lot of people seem to love the parkour system in Unity, but it's actually really bad. It gives the player very little control in what they're actually doing, and is obviously very animation based, where that can lead to some cool looking moments. Most of the time it's just you staggering around trying to get the game to do something and it just not doing that thing. Stealth in this game is pretty broken, to where you just seem to get detected out of nowhere, which again, in comparison to Mirage, I feel like Mirage at least does a bit better. I personally do enjoy the combat system in Unity a bit more. I kind of like that it's a bit more in line with the original Assassin's Creed and having these like light and heavy attacks, and does have some challenge to it, even though I do think there's some ridiculousness to the combat and the fact that it's just so easy to get shot down out of nowhere in this game. I think the city of Paris is still one of the best cities in the entire franchise, to where it just felt like the kind of happy medium of a point where we weren't so far forward like the likes of Syndicate, to where you needed the likes of a rope launcher to get around, though it still had this like really massive city to explore. And obviously you gotta talk about the technical issues of the game, which again, the game was completely broken at launch. It's obviously been patched since then to where it's a lot more stable, still not perfect, but in terms of the overall gameplay experience, I feel like this is pretty much on par with Mirage. I think there are certain systems that are definitely better done in Mirage, and Mirage is a more polished game. I feel like I personally like the city of Paris more, and I think the black box missions in particular are much stronger in Unity, where again, it kind of evens each other out. So for me, the tiebreaker ended up being the narrative, and for me, I just connected the narrative of Unity a bit more. Now, is the narrative of Unity that good? No, it's not. However, again, like for me, I just felt nothing with the Mirage narrative. Like it really just did not do much for me at all. While I feel like with Unity, I at least did enjoy the Arno and Elise dynamic. I feel like there was an interesting dynamic set up at first of this conflict between him being an assassin and her being a Templar, and I overall like what they do with Balek. I think Balek is one of the best side characters in the game's history, and I think it's still underwhelming how exactly they concluded his storyline. as I think it would have been a lot stronger to have that at the conclusion of the game instead of having Germain as the main antagonist, who is a much more boring villain. But again, I still feel like I cared more about the likes of Arno and Elise, to where, while its narrative as a whole is still not particularly great, I still feel like it was better than that of Mirages, and that's the minor reason why it's above it here, number 8. And number 7, the middle of the list, a game that I think is pretty appropriate for being right in the middle of the list, and that game is Assassin's Creed 3. And Assassin's Creed 3, again, has gone up one spot since the last time I did this list, in the sense that it is above Unity at this point. And I mean, really, my opinions of Assassin's Creed 3 have not really changed that much since then. I feel like I still do have a lot of the criticisms that I had back when I originally did that video. I still think the overall pacing of the game is a bit off, particularly due to the fact that you don't play as Connor until after the Haytham sections, which, while the Haytham sections as a whole are pretty solid, it's still a bit of a weird pacing for the game. I do also feel like the mission design at points is pretty terrible. The forcing of Connor into these big moments in American history is also really stupid. The American Revolution setting is also just really boring. And overall, the level design is really poor, with the parkour system also being dumbed down. I also feel like the modern day, even though it's commonly cited as one of the best in the series, which, I mean, to be fair, it's still like better than the non-existent ones. It's one that kind of misses the point of the modern day. It's one where Desmond is essentially just doing the same style of missions that you would be doing in the Ancestor storyline, which kind of nullifies the dichotomy between the two gameplay experiences, while also there's not as much mirroring between the two storylines, which is kind of also the point of having the two storylines, is to mirror off of each other and allow the modern day character to develop from the experiences he sees in the past, which we don't really get much out of. Now, in terms of the things I do like, I personally do still like the character of Connor. I know people's criticisms with him and how he's too serious and how he makes some illogical decisions, but I still personally enjoy his tragic backstory, and personally do like how that paints his stubbornness in the game, even though, again, certain points do seem a bit ridiculous. I love the character of Haytham. I think he is such a great foil for Connor in this game, and still the rooftop scene between the two is still one of my favorite scenes in the entire franchise. I do like that this game brought some more grayness back into the series, where after the likes of AC1, the Ezio trilogy had really stripped the series of a lot of its moral grayness, where the assassins were the good guys, the Templars were the bad guys. This is a game where you really see a lot more of the two sides, even more so than something like Rogue. You also have some decent side content like the Homestead missions, which, while the writing might be a bit off at points, it still is this more lighthearted content that allows you to see more of Connor's life at the Homestead. You also have the Pegleg missions, which are not as good as the Assassin Tombs, but are still like a nice continuation of that sort of formula. I think as a whole, this is a game that I am largely conflicted on. I think there are some pretty big pros, there are some pretty big cons. I feel like this is a game that felt like this turning point for Assassin's Creed, where I don't like how much it impacts the future of the series, making it a lot more focused on historical tourism and obviously lessening the modern day through Death of Desmond. Again, there's things I don't like about AC3 in that light, but I still feel like it is still one of the more nuanced stories told in the series, where again, the Assassin-Templar conflict is shown in a more complex way. And I always like the Connor and Haytham relationship. So again, there's enough good there to where I have it here, number 7. Now, number 6. And here we're moving on to a game that has dropped significantly on my list here, where it's funny that in my last video, I literally had this at number 2. And I even said at the time that this was so close to being number 1. However, in the time since then, I have dropped this game a lot. And I think a lot of this comes through a lot of recontextualization of the Assassin's Creed series, of recognizing what the Assassin's Creed series really does mean to me. And I think at the end of the day, this is a game that I actually think should be in the bad column. I think this is a bad Assassin's Creed game, but still a game I have a lot of nostalgia for, to where I struggle playing it much lower than this. But at number 6, I do have Assassin's Creed Origins. And again, I just have a lot of nostalgia for Origins. Origins is a game that when it originally came out, I played it over and over and over again. I played Origins more than any game from the PS4 generation on. Origins is also a game that I've speedrun in the past. I absolutely adore the character of Bayek, who is one of my favorite characters in all of Assassin's Creed. I think the performance of him by Abubakar Salim is probably the best performance in all of Assassin's Creed. But the rest of the game is a mess. And I think this is a thing that's tough to reconcile at this point, where for me, I think there is a massive disparity between the things I do really love about this game and the things I really don't like. again, I love the character of Bayek. I think the open world of ancient Egypt is cool to explore, and still one of the best looking open worlds in the series' history. But everything else is either bad or a really mixed bag. I do think gameplay wise, it's obviously the start of the RPG transition for the Assassin's Creed series, which fundamentally is not Assassin's Creed. It fundamentally breaks Assassin's Creed lore by having an RPG in the Animus, though, again, I was fine with it at the time, and I still do enjoy the gameplay loop of this game personally. I do enjoy the combat system, which again is a watered down version of Dark Souls, though I still personally enjoy it. Obviously spend most of my time playing this game at this point, playing New Game Plus, which has kind of made me forget a lot of the more tedious aspects of the RPG system in this game, where obviously I don't have to deal with doing upgrades and leveling up, which to be fair is a big part of the experience, and that is something I am factoring in a bit more of this assessment, is the fact that you do have to do those things. Even though, again, I personally do really enjoy the fact that you could still play this New Game Plus and finish it in like 6 hours, being a more tight gameplay experience there. Even then, mission structure wise, it's largely uninspired. Obviously, the game gets criticized a lot for having a lot of missions where you have to carry people out of forts, which, I mean, yeah, does happen a lot within the main story and within side content. The Aya missions in particular are pretty bad, where they're just straight up annoying to play, especially considering Aya's equipment is a lot weaker than that of Bayek's. The modern day is obviously terrible, Layla just being a terrible character, and certain aspects of it just not making any sense, and really just the general narrative is also a massive mess of a game, and it's one where I think there are still some great moments within it. Again, I love the Rujik scene, I love the Medunamun scene, I love a lot of these individual scenes with Bayek as a character. Again, I love Bayek's character, but I think when you look at the plot of the story and even its connection to the overall Assassin's Creed series, it's just a mess, where all of it feels like a massive retcon. The game's antagonists are simply just not really developed at all. And again, still the fact that Flavius is the main antagonist of the story is just so funny to me, considering his complete lack of development. And again, I think it just leaves me in this weird spot with Origins, where out of any of these games, I would actually probably rather replay Origins than the majority of these games. I think as a gameplay experience, it's probably the ones that I have the most fun with. But as an Assassin's Creed experience, it's easily one of the worst. And for me, I do think at this point, I look at this as part of the bad tier on many aspects. I do think it is on par with the likes of Valhalla, Syndicate, and Rogue in terms of its genuine quality, especially as an Assassin's Creed game. However, as a game that I've put so much time into and at this point have a lot of reverence for, I do love the character of Bayek. It makes it tough for me to put it lower, but I do have to put it much lower than I did in my last ranking, and that's why it's here number 6. Now number 5, and here we're going to get into a bit of a controversial pick. I think even in my last list it was a bit controversial. This one was as low as it is. And finally, my opinions on this game have just gone even further down as time has gone on, which is funny as I believe it's in the exact same placement as last time. But that game is Assassin's Creed 2. And Assassin's Creed 2 is a game I have a lot of nostalgia for. Again, I got into the series around the time of Assassin's Creed 2, and I remember playing Assassin's Creed 2 over and over and over again. I mean, to this day, Assassin's Creed 2 is one of my most played games of all time. However, I also recognize the fact that Assassin's Creed 2 is just not as good as some other entries in the series from a modern perspective. Now, I think the things that are good are that, yes, the story of Ezio is fantastic. This coming of age story for him learning to become an assassin. I still love the involvement of those who came before. Again, the ending of this game is still one of my favorite moments in all of gaming. Most other things, though, I'm a bit mixed on, to be honest. I do feel like the more I do look back on the Assassin's Creed series at this point, the more I kind of realize that the Assassin's Creed series has just never been consistent, where I think for years, I had always thought that, okay, Assassin's Creed had progressively gotten better from AC1 till the end of the Ezio saga, and that's where it started to kind of decline. But I think I've come to realize in the modern day that AC2 is just as much at fault for the decline of Assassin's Creed as future entries, if not even more, in the fact that I think I've come to realize that Assassin's Creed 2 is just so radically different from Assassin's Creed 1 in a way that does kind of take away the initial spirit of Assassin's Creed 1, where for AC2 they again take away a lot of the complexity of the story from AC1. AC2's story is simply the assassins are the good guys, the Templars are the bad guys. Templars are portrayed in this very cartoonish way. Ezio is portrayed in this very heroic way. Again, it feels like there's a lack of complexity within the main narrative. Also, as much as I love the truth back in the day and finding out about all these conspiracies of what the Templars and assassins were involved with over time, I've come to realize that that's actually all really stupid. Looking on it, especially in conjunction with AC1, the fact that the Templar-assassin conflict had to do with literally everything that happened in world history is just ridiculous when you really think about it. I still personally find the mission structure at points to be abhorrent. I think the first couple sequences in Venice are two of the worst sequences in the entire series from a gameplay perspective, of it just being straight up annoying to play. The combat system to me is still pretty boring. I don't particularly love the fact that it's very reactionary. You spend a lot of time just having to counter other opponents' attacks. It's not a very aggressive system, which, I mean, to be fair, there's its own complaints with the more aggressive systems that we'll probably talk about, but I feel like AC1 was kind of the happy medium of the two, while this game is just a lot more defensive, which I find kind of slow. I think this game also does lean into the historical tourism a bit more than I remember, with there just being so many random historical figures that'll show up and be major figures for Ezio's development, alongside the fact that it does add this more jovial tone to the game that feels very disparate from that of the original game. I also feel like this game took away the investigation aspect of the assassination that was prominent in AC1, alongside making social stealth a lot easier. And I just think in retrospect, this game does already strip away the original Assassin's Creed of a lot of its identity, where even though AC2 was obviously more applauded at the time, and I personally still loved AC2, and I still like AC2, I do think when looking back on it, there is a lot here that feels already very disconnected from AC1. So I'm mixing down the fact that, again, I think some of the mission structure is not particularly great, and I think the combat hasn't aged that well. Really, what's left for me in this game is Ezio's story, which I still think is very strong, but again, not enough to really propel it much higher on the list. So for me, again, I do feel like while AC2 definitely has some strong points, it's still not this all-time great entry in the series that many people seem to remember it as. So because of that, for me, it's here number 5. Now number 4, and now we're officially at what I would consider the top tier of Assassin's Creed games. I think these are the best games that the series has to offer, but none of these entries are perfect in my mind. I feel like Assassin's Creed is a series that, again, I think I've come to recognize the fact that I think all of these have decently big flaws within them, but all have very different flaws. And considering my shifting views on the Assassin's Creed series, I feel like this was just a very brutal decision to be making here on where exactly to rank all these, as again, I just think they're so close. But at number 4, I'm going to make probably a bit of a shocking decision here in taking what used to be and what I would have called my favorite game in the Assassin's Creed series for years, drop it all the way to number 4, and that game is Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. And again, Brotherhood had been my number 1 for years. I remember at the time Brotherhood coming out, I adored this game. I remember staying up late at night on school nights while grounded and sneaking away to trying to play Brotherhood when my parents couldn't stop me. And it's also alongside ACs 1 and 2, one of my most replayed games. I used to play this game over and over again. I mean, Brotherhood has always been the game that I personally looked at as my number 1. And really, my opinions on Assassin's Creed Brotherhood as a whole have not changed. I feel like everything I think about Assassin's Creed Brotherhood is what I thought about Assassin's Creed Brotherhood at the time of my last ranking. What has changed about it is more so my perspective. I think just my current view on gaming and what I want out of a video game has radically changed. I feel like Assassin's Creed Brotherhood provides what I used to want in the Assassin's Creed experience. I think it is a game that I think is probably one of the most balanced Assassin's Creed games, having incredible side content, one of the best open worlds in the series, having a likable protagonist, having a great arc for that protagonist, having debatably the best modern day in the series' history, and there is a lot to like from Brotherhood. But I do think now, looking at what I personally want from an Assassin's Creed experience, I don't know if Brotherhood is that game anymore. But I still feel like Brotherhood, for the most part, is still an incredible Assassin's Creed experience. I do think it takes a lot of what AC2 did, but then expands upon it in a mostly good way. Yeah, I think it keeps in a lot of the same systems. Obviously, it improves the combat through making it a lot more aggressive. Now, I will say, even though I think it's a lot more fun to play, I will criticize in the fact that it does make it a bit too easy. And through that kind of disincentivizes stealth, because there's not that much of an issue going to combat because you know you could easily handle those situations. So at the same time, it does also play into Ezio's development as a fighter in the game. So again, I think there's at least some contextual narrative stuff going on there. Obviously, the side content in this game is some of the best in the entire franchise. The ability to renovate the entire city of Rome is really fun. And alongside alongside that comes some really great side missions, like the Christina memories, where you get to see the tragic backstory of Ezio and Christina's relationship. The layers of Romulus are fantastic in this game, obviously being a modification of the Assassination Tombs from AC2. You obviously have the truth, which leads up to that moment of the conversation with Subject 16, which is obviously now recontextualized, and all that's really fun. I think the side content in this game is near perfection. I also think the modern day is near perfection. I love the modern day and how it is able to utilize Ezio's story to progress Desmond's. We have them being in Monteriggioni, which is obviously saving on assets, but also still really cool. And you also have the culmination with the big shocking reveal of Juno and her manipulating Desmond to kill Lucy, which is all this fantastic moment there, one that really blew my mind as a kid. My issue with Brotherhood is I do feel like its narrative is a bit of a step down from other entries earlier on in the series. I mean, there definitely is this good arc for Ezio and him learning to work with others. Obviously, this playing into the theme of brotherhood that is literally the title of the game. You have him fitting into his leadership role within the Assassins. And again, that is a decent arc. My issue comes from the fact that, again, I do think it is told in a mostly shallow way, particularly in the fact that the Assassin-Templar conflict is, again, just very baseline. The Assassins are the good guys. The Templars are the bad guys. I mean, Cesare in particular is just such an over-the-top villain. I just think the moral grayness of the series is just completely lacking in this game. And really, I just feel like Ezio's arc is not as interesting to me in this game as it is in Aces 2 or Revelations. Along with the fact that I do think there are some annoying missions here and there, again, some really tedious tailing missions. Some of the most tedious tailing missions in the series come from this game. So again, while it is still a great game, I feel like there's still things to nitpick with this game. And really, again, that goes with the entire top 4 here. For me, these top 4, again, are all really strong Assassin's Creed games, but all have some criticisms to them that make me want to knock them down. And again, it was this big debate for me on exactly to place all these. And for me, I do feel like the reason why I do have Brotherhood lower here is simply because, again, in the modern day, I do look for a more complex, focused narrative experience. And I feel like Brotherhood is the most lacking in that front of these top 4. Easily feeling like the most shallow of the top 4 in my mind. To where, again, while I still really enjoy playing this game, and this is probably one of the best gameplay experiences you're going to get from the Assassin's Creed series, I just feel like it's not necessarily the experience that I personally want in the modern day. So for me, that is a major reason why I have to leave Brotherhood back here at number 4. Now number 3, and again, this was such a brutal decision at this point. Again, for me, these top 3 are 3 of the most complex stories told in the Assassin's Creed series, 3 of the best written games in the series, and 3 of my favorite stories told in the video game medium. So again, really distinguishing which one is the best of these 3 was a really tough decision. But at number 3, we're actually going to wrap up the Ezio trilogy here, where here I'm going to be leaving behind Assassin's Creed Revelations, which actually shocks me that I have this low. As again, this was very much in debate for me as potentially having this as the best Assassin's Creed game. Even when I initially made the decision to put Brotherhood down at 4, my gut instinct was that, okay, that means Revelations is at number 1. But after a lot of thought about this, I simply just could not do it. And again, for me, this is tough. Again, for me, Assassin's Creed Revelations is one of the greatest stories ever told. I think it is this fantastic conclusion to Ezio's story. This culmination of really everything in the Assassin's Creed series up to this point. Again, wrapping up Ezio and Altair's stories in one package and giving them this fantastic farewell in Altair's library, which the monologue that Ezio gives at the end of this game is still one of my favorite moments in all of Assassin's Creed. And I just love Ezio's arc in this game. Him becoming disillusioned with the Creed and finding a way to let go of all of it. This game has some really great writing, obviously written by Darwin McDevitt. Complexity of the villains is fantastic. Again, Ahmet is one of my favorite Assassin's Creed villains, which is funny because I feel like most people look at him as a very boring, generic antagonist, when in reality, I feel like he's one of the most complex in the entire series. And I like this mirroring that's there between him and Ezio. That's done extremely well from my point of view. I also love the modern day scenes, the ones between Desmond and Clay, and the conversations between Desmond and Clay that are all pretty well enacted. Now, I will say Revelations as a whole, gameplay wise, feels like more of Brotherhood, but kind of worse. I do feel like there are things that are changed here that were not for the better. Again, the inclusion of the Templar awareness system is just really annoying to deal with. The city of Constantinople, while I personally enjoy the city a bit more than that of Rome, I still feel like the process of exploring the city is not as interesting as that of Rome. There's not as much to do in the city, and the side content in this game is definitely a lot more lacking than the previous entry, where outside of the Master Assassin missions, I don't feel like this game does anything to really improve upon the previous game's formula. You also have the addition of the hook blade, which I personally like, but it also is something that does kind of take away from the initial parkour system. And obviously I don't like the tower defense, though again, it's not really utilized in the game that much. The crafting system is not particularly interesting, despite how much focus there is on that either. And again, like I think there are definitely things to criticize from this game gameplay wise. Again, being one of the few entries in the series that took its narrative as the priority over its gameplay experience. But I do think in comparison to the game that we're about to be talking about, I think that game excels upon this one through it having a more satisfying gameplay loop. And I mean, also, I do feel like there's a little bit of a lack of focus in this game, where I think this is a story that you can very much tell that the conflict with the Templars is something that was kind of shoehorned into the story. It very much feels like it's simply just there because Ubisoft forced Darby to write in Templars into the story. And again, to me, that is the minor knock here that really does end up knocking this below the next two entries. The fact that like the flow of the narrative in the middle of the game is not as consistent within this entry, even though again, I do think this still has some of the greatest moments in all of Assassin's Creed. And it's such a fitting farewell to Ezio that actually gives him a lot more depth as a character. But I do think it's that minor inconsistency for me, and also it's rather lackluster gameplay in comparison to the other entries around it. It does leave it behind here at number 3 for me. Now number 2, and at number 2 we have another game. I could see a legitimate argument for this being number 1 on the list, and I actually thought at a point this would be number 1 on the list, where I do think outside of Brotherhood, this is probably the game that mixes having a complex narrative while also having a really fun gameplay experience the best. Though again, there are still some gripes here and there, though still at number 2 I do have a game that my respect for has just grown even more over time, and that game is Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. Again, I did my Black Flag retrospective not long ago, and I still stand by a lot of what I said there. I still adore a lot of what this game does. I think in terms of its story, the story of Edward Kenway is one of the greatest in video game history. I think the way they also made it an Assassin's Creed story is very impressive. The fact that it is this story about how the Creed changed this one man's life is, again, an incredible story to be told in the video game medium, and especially in a series called Assassin's Creed. We also have a certain game that we're going to be talking about very soon. Very few other stories really focus on the actual Creed of the series, despite that literally being the name of the series. And beyond that, again, this game has incredible side characters, most of which bring a lot to the table. The gameplay loop in this game is also really fun. I think this game was the perfect mix of historical tourism and keeping in line with the Assassin's Creed identity, where the naval combat is just straight up fun. I really always enjoyed doing naval fights and also grinding and upgrading your ship. Now, I will criticize the mission structure of this game. I still think it's really terrible, particularly the fact that there are so many tailing missions in this game, which is just ridiculous. I also don't love the fact that the game kind of level gates you at points where you need to upgrade your ship at points for you to be able to get through some of the naval encounters, which again, I do like the naval combat, but I don't love the fact that the main story necessitates that you upgrade things for it. Also, the modern day is pretty bad. I mean, while there's still some minor things to like from it, it really just leads nowhere, and it really just feels like a whole bunch of lore dumped on you that doesn't really serve a true purpose. But again, I still adore the writing of this game. I mean, the memory corridor sequences in this game are some of the best in the series. I like that this game still adds complexity to its characters, while there is still a decent amount of the assassins are the good guys, Templars are the bad guys. I think Torres, at least, is the character that's given a bit more nuance to him. You also have like the complexities of characters like Hornigold. I've always liked Blackbeard. Mary Reed's a fantastic character. Stede Bonnet's really fun. Charles Vane and Bonnie. Again, there are just so many like really great characters in this game. However, I do think for me, the main thing that is keeping this away from the number 1 spot is I do feel like this game feels a little bit less focused than the number 1 entry. While again, the narrative is really great and the gameplay is really strong as well, I don't feel like everything perfectly fits together in this nice focused package as well as the number 1 entry. And again, this game still has a lot going for it. Some of the best characterization in the entire series, but again, I do feel like it is some pacing issues throughout the middle portions of the game, especially when even adding in the aspects of the game forcing you to grind at points that further pads out the game, that mixing that in with, again, some kind of annoying mission structure at points and a bevy of tailing missions. Again, it's these minor nitpicks to me that do leave Black Flag here behind at number 2. Now number 1, the game that I'm now declaring as the best game in the Assassin's Creed series is one that has now taken a massive jump from the previous ranking. I mean, this is a game that was all the way somehow at number 9 on my previous list. But again, just looking at the type of games that I respect in the modern day, at number 1, I do have Assassin's Creed 1, which is an interesting case here in the fact that, obviously, again, like, I ranked it super low in my previous list, which, to be fair, even by the time that video came out, I kind of regret having it as low as I did. And I do think part of the reason why I looked at it a bit lower back in the day is kind of because of the general reception to this game. Because whenever you hear people talk about Assassin's Creed 1, it's always under the vein of how primitive the game is nowadays and how repetitive the game is. To our mixing down the fact that I hadn't replayed it for myself in a bit, I feel like that kind of bled into my own opinions of the game. But now, again, having re-experienced it, having adjusted my overall view of the video game medium, I do come out of it now looking at Assassin's Creed 1 as near perfection, with many of its imperfections coming from the fact that it is an older game. It is a game from 2007 and is a game without some of the minor improvements that were made for future entries, even though some other things were scaled back somehow from its original entry. But again, my criticisms of it are not the same criticisms that most people would have of this game. I mean, AC1, yes, the initial mission structure is repetitive in the fact that, yes, you are doing the same thing 9 times for 9 separate assassinations, though, like, is it really that much more repetitive than doing the same style of missions in Assassin's Creed Origins or Valhalla or Odyssey over and over and over again? Like, at least here, the same missions that you're doing over and over again are adding to the overall experience. It's these missions that you're doing to investigate your target, to be able to know about your target before your eventual assassination of them. Again, it makes sense why you're doing these things. In those other entries, just feels like you're doing them for reasons that don't even progress the plot. And while I think there is still a complaint to be had of, okay, there's a lack of mission variety, I don't feel like it's as big of a criticism as I used to have with this game. Mixing now the fact that, again, I think parkour-wise is still probably strongest in the series. I mean, really, all of the earlier Assassin's Creed games utilize a very similar parkour system, though I think in retrospect, again, AC1's level design is extremely impressive in where it feels like the cities are hand-built to be parkoured in. Probably more fluidly than any other entry in the series. You obviously have the heavy emphasis on social stealth in this game. You have a combat system that I've always personally enjoyed. I've always loved the assassination missions in this game and the variety there is in the ways to approach them. Now, I will say, still one of the biggest criticisms of this game from our lens is the fact that obviously you don't have as much to your disposal in this game. Obviously, there aren't as many tools to utilize. You don't even have the likes of, like, air assassinations or assassinating from ledges. Again, there definitely is less options on how to assassinate your targets in this game, which ideally this game would have, that would allow for a lot more freedom in how to approach these sections. Outside that, again, I still think this has one of the best narratives in the entire series. I think the development of Altair and showing his redemption over the course of this narrative and having his dynamic with Al-Mualim and with Malik are fantastic storylines for him in this game. I do also love the modern day, where I think the modern day in this game is executed brilliantly in a way that feels like this massive juxtaposition between past and the present, while also having this air of mystery over what's really going on here. You have these great conversations between Desmond and Vidic. I just personally do enjoy a lot what this game does narratively. I think the writing of AC1 is just leaps and bounds better than most other entries in the series. I do feel like the complexity of the Assassin-Templar conflict is done extremely well in this game. I do love the complexity that's given to all of our targets, to where initially they come off as evil for evil's sake, but then you assassinate them and realize they had purpose behind their actions and reason for why they're doing things. And again, this slow realization that they're all connected and finding out how they're connected is all all really great as well. Again, I really just personally love a lot of what Assassin's Creed has to offer. And again, this is still one of my most played games of all time. I, again, used to replay this game when I was a kid over and over and over again. I adored this game back then. And I think now being able to look at it from a more analytical lens in the modern day, after having recently revisited it, it really does make me appreciate this game even more, especially after seeing how the series turned out. After obviously the likes of Odyssey, Valhalla, and even Mirage, it really makes you respect how much they got right in the original entry, which, while I think you can definitely argue that I'm being blinded by nostalgia or just probably being jaded with the current status of the Assassin's Creed franchise, I do feel like after going back and playing the original game and seeing what it was trying to do and seeing how focused of an experience it was, how every little thing kind of blends together in crafting this pretty well-rounded product, especially for the year of 2007, I do come out of all this just looking at Assassin's Creed 1 as probably the least flawed entry of the entire series, and something that set an incredible precedent for the series that was simply just never executed as well beyond this. Again, very rarely ever having a narrative as complex as what was told in AC1, very rarely executing on many of the pillars that AC1 was built on. Like, I wish there was a future entry that did everything AC1 did, but better, but there simply just isn't. Or Assassin's Creed just simply ended up being a series that, instead of progressing over time, it instead just changed. Not even trying to redo what the initial entry did and just doing things radically different. And I think AC1 just executes on almost every front extremely well, to where, while again there are minor high points in a lot of these other highly ranked entries that we've talked about, I don't feel like any of them fully piece everything together as well as Assassin's Creed 1 does. So for me, it does end up landing here at number 1. But there we go. That's my updated ranking on the Assassin's Creed series. Now, as I mentioned, I don't really care that much about Assassin's Creed anymore. I mean, I'll still play the old games here and there. I still do intend on continuing on my retrospective series with Rogue and Unity later this year, and Syndicate the following year, and then who knows after that. I'll probably end up doing Origins at some point. I think it'll be funny to eventually do Odyssey, to really complain about it all the way through. I would like to eventually redo my AC2 retrospective at some point. Also, obviously do an AC1 one. Again, I think there's definitely retrospectives I'd like to do down the road. There's still like individual Assassin's Creed rankings I would like to do at some point. Like, so a protagonist ranking, a modern day ranking, and Assassin Tomb ranking would be fun. I always thought about doing a tailing mission ranking, which I think would be funny. Again, there's definitely Assassin's Creed ideas I have that I want to do. Just don't know exactly when I'll do them. But again, that is my updated ranking. I think this will probably be the last ranking I do. Probably. Maybe. Who knows? Maybe I'll change my mind in another 5 years. But either way, for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.